In this first module, we'll be going over the very basics of Android itself. Perhaps you have an iPhone or you just haven't really had a chance to use an Android device. Don't worry, this module has got you covered. We'll be learning what Android is, taking a look at the basics of how to use an Android device, and talking about some fun topics like the history of Android and where it's going. Android is primarily a mobile operating system. That means it was designed primarily to work on mobile phones and other mobile devices. But as you'll see a little later in this module, that doesn't mean it is the only place where it can be used. Android was developed by the giant company Google, but Android has an interesting history. It wasn't initially created by Google, and it has been around since 2003. We'll talk more about that when we get into Android's history. Another important thing to know about Android is that it was designed for touch. This is one of the big reasons why mobile operating systems like Android and iOS were developed. Many other operating systems before Android and other non-touch centric operating systems were designed to be used with a mouse and keyboard or stylus. Those kinds of operating systems didn't really work well for mobile phones and other mobile devices where it was much easier for a user to interact with the device by touching the screen. As we learn more about Android and designing Android applications, you'll see that touch is a very important consideration that is baked right into the operating system. You may have noticed me using the word operating system quite a bit so far. Don't worry if you don't know what that is. In the next module, we'll go over it a bit more in depth. But for right now, you can think of an operating system as the basic software that runs on a computer or phone. Android is also open source. This is something that is very unique about Android and is one of the reasons for its widespread adoption. Open source basically means that anyone can see the code that makes up the Android operating system. Not only can you see the code, but you could also contribute to that code if you wanted to. This also means that the Android operating system itself is free. So, if you are so inclined, you could actually create your own phone and put Android on that phone. Although doing so is not nearly as easy as it sounds, and there are a few legal issues that we'll talk about later. Another neat thing about Android that we'll talk about in much more detail is how many different devices it runs on. From phones to tablets and more, you can find Android running in many different places on all kinds of hardware. This is different from many other mobile operating systems, which are designed to run only on a handful of different devices. And currently, Android is by far the most widely used smartphone OS in the world. I'll show you an interesting chart at the end of this module that shows just how dominant Android has become.